Right, everybody. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are we doing?
Spectacular. How are you?
Cold.
Everybody hanging in there? Finals start Wednesday, and they go for 10 days or so. Everybody spread out a little bit. Are you jammed up at the start? How do your finals look? What do you think about it? All right, so let's just get started. Let's be efficient with our time, efficient with your time. You all have a lot to do. And I will just reiterate my comment about the final. The final is supposed to be a time where you get a chance to show what you know. All right? And so, as I said in class the other day, do I expect you to be able to pull on the names of all 40-some authors that we've read, at a moment's notice? The answer would be no. But should you have, ideally 15 to 20 that you can manipulate and use and understand those arguments pretty well, that would be great. And then that long laundry list, it looks like a laundry list on the review sheet, do you need to memorize every single one of those for a multiple choice quiz? No, this is not like your quizzes. This is all essays, all written, and it's all of that becomes resource for you. It all becomes evidence for you to build your arguments. So so I want to take time today to answer any and all of your questions. I want to take time today to kind of model and stitch through some stories, because really, when you think about what the goal of the course is to understand how it is that our education system functions, where it came from, what are the origins of these pieces of the education system that may be frustrating to us today, that we may want to do better. In order to change the current setup, the best way to understand how to change the current setup is to know where these things came from. Where are those invisible strings? Where are those invisible strings that are holding things in place due to historical patterns of practice and historical ideas and so forth? And so we'll take some time to go through all this. You're free, welcome to leave anytime you want. You don't need to stay. Totally optional. But I would think that this might be some of the most productive study time you have. So I stretched this out till 12:30, 2.5 hours, which is a long time to sit here and talk about things. But if you're going to be studying anyways, this will just be hopefully an efficient use of your time. Okay. And I do need to leave at 12:30. My other class that I teach, my final presentations for about 3 or 4 hours this afternoon. And so I need to get out of here right at 12:30 to get to my other group downstairs and do that. So I can't stick around afterwards. But tomorrow I can be around a little bit, Wednesday around a little bit, and so if you have any other follow-up questions. All right? So as you saw in the review sheet, I gave my little one-paragraph pitch for what our goal is and how to use that review sheet. The goal is not to memorize stuff, not to memorize disconnected stuff, that's not the goal. The goal is to understand how the system functions. Okay? And if we think about the school, think about each individual school as part of a broader network, okay, that functions in a community, across the city, across the state, all right, across the country. We begin to see all these different touch points for how the system has come to be and how it can be changed. And as you know from your policy papers, your outline in the paper, we pushed you really hard to identify a key audience. Who is the decision maker that can make the decision that will do something different that you're calling for. Okay? And it's important to know whether that's at the local level, all right, at the state level, at the federal level, at the regional level, just where that is. So understanding the broader system is really important. Within that, we try to understand where the dollars come from to pay for this whole thing, to pay for the over $600 billion a year enterprise that we have. We spoke at length about the role of religion, and we started the course way back in the 1600s. And so much of the earliest formal educational efforts were about religion. And that was the whole point of this. Okay, and even you get up to man in the mid 1800s, and while he was saying this is kind of a religion, this is beyond religion. There is a certain core morality that we want all people in Massachusetts to kind of adhere to. So some would call that religion, okay? And the various Protestant faiths within Massachusetts at the time would have all viewed this as kind of something in common. But if you were from outside that Protestant tradition in Massachusetts at that time, you would have viewed this as incredibly religious. Right? And so the Catholics to this day don't really trust the public schools because of their Protestant base, which is why there's an ongoing separate and distinct Catholic education system. Very few religions are able to maintain a separate education system, but the Catholics have been trying, and they're in deep financial trouble now for reasons that we spoke about. They used to have nuns teaching, they didn't pay nuns very much, and now you've got to pay lay people to teach, and so the finances of it don't work. But anyways, so religion is an early thread through this. All right? Certainly wealth has always been an issue. Okay, those who have money typically have more political power, not always, but typically. All right? And that puts them in a position of being in charge. And then it's this phrase that we've learned, this term of educating other people's children. Okay, so we can go back 400 years ago, 300, 200, 100, or today, and we have this notion of educating other people's children. Okay, so religion's been a theme, wealth has been a theme. All right, and money has been a theme. Who pays for this thing? All right. Some other core themes, and I'll tell you in a second why I'm going through these themes. Another core theme is who gets educated? Okay, who should be educated? And we have this notion, this America's promise, that in this country everyone should be educated. All right, and this has been done in different ways. We go back to the earliest education of American Indians, okay, extracting them from their home. Okay, the earliest education of the Chinese immigrants, the earliest education of the African Americans and the slaves. All right. There's always been this notion that everyone should be educated. And of course, the early days was to save them from the devil, right? The Luther statement. And again, so the religion and this ties them together. And as we get more recent years, this has become much more of a policy-oriented deal, where this grand American experiment of the comprehensive American high school, where everybody in a community would go to the same high school. And I made a big deal out of that Committee of 10 and the Cardinal Principles, because this is a brand new idea. Not that everyone go to school. Many other countries have every kid going to school. But this is every kid going to school in the same place. Okay, the same place. In the same building. And then we saw how that got stratified. We saw in Hamilton High, we certainly saw in Berkeley High, how schools stratify internally. But there's this root level of America's promise that every kid in the community can and should go to school for free. All right? And let's meet their needs where they are. And of course, that is the crux of so much of this course, is who's deciding what needs these kids have. They should be educated to high levels, like Du Bois was talking about. Should they be educated to very rudimentary and common levels, as many others have talked about? And what is the goal of the education system? Okay. So within just those broad themes there, I want to start taking your questions, and as we do that, we'll try to work through some specifics. But right now, I want to introduce just these broad themes, because these are the threads that run from 1600s right up through today, and will continue running for the next several hundred years. And these things are not going away. There are these tensions between who's in charge, the local educators versus local parents. And we've talked at length about that. Local educators versus the state, okay, and the federal government. Yes, there's a vertical stratification of power and authority of what should be done. And then there's this horizontal one, which is parents and schools. Okay, so you got all these tensions all over the place, all of which makes this exceedingly hard to change. Okay. But as we talked in the last class, one of the goals of our course is to motivate you, that you will then go ahead and make some change in some way, and how you never know where that change might take place. Okay. So with that preamble, with that kind of intro to our however long we stick around here, okay. Let me just point out a couple things on the board. These home effect, school effect, peer effect. These are issues that came out front and center during the Coleman readings and after, but they've always been a big part of this course. Okay? Are we trying to save kids from their home effect? The Lancasterian system of schools, where all these poor kids are running around the cities, we had to pull them out of their homes, put them into a big classroom like this, okay, and separate them from their families. Trying to reduce the home effect and increase the school effect. Coleman then found that we've been kind of failed miserably in doing that because the home effect is so strong for a whole variety of reasons that we've talked about and can talk about today. Then we've got a whole these set of what you might call theories or conceptual models here. And we've touched on little bits of theory throughout the course, trying to zero in on just a couple that you could actually use and put, do this with your hands. They put the lenses in front of your face. But we start out with the functionalism and the conflict theory and how they give you two very different views of the world, very different views of what's normal, what's acceptable, what's good. Right? Then we moved on to the capitals and the different forms of capitals, the human capital, economic, cultural, and social, and how when you put those lenses in front of your eyes, different things come into focus. All right. And then last but not least, this conception of need, the thick and thin, and that community-aware version of public policy that we're trying to promote. There's other little ones, there's some identity theories, other things that were in some of the readings. But as the kind of common language that you all should be familiar with, which makes it fair game for us to ask you to use these terms, if you see where I'm going with this. Okay. trying to be very transparent here. Okay. These would be good things that we should be able to use and articulate, and then illustrate through different authors, illustrate through different court cases, illustrate through different policies and programs. All right. So that's our idea there. All right. So with that, why don't we just take some questions? And if you don't have any, I can ramble all day. But it would be neat to have your questions because then we know what you're focused on. So, kick us off. What do you got?
What do you want us to know about the nation at risk? Because we didn't really cover it in class, but it was on the review sheet and it was also in the Jeopardy.
Very good. You'll notice on the review sheet some words, some terms had stars next to them. Okay, and the stars next to them meant we did not actually cover that very much with any degree of seriousness in the course, but you should be familiar with what that is. Or at least it could be something that's helpful to you if you wanted to put the extra 5 minutes to learn what the nation at risk is. And I can help you with that right now, of how that could help answer some of the questions. So Nation at Risk was a 1983 report by the federal government. Okay, actually this commissioned report. And the quick backstory on this was, no one remembers President Carter. I do. I remember President Carter. Okay. When I was in 5th grade, our schools always give kids a ballot, you vote for the president and so forth. So that was the first vote that I actually remember. I was only in 5th grade, so it didn't count, but in our school vote. In 5th grade, President Carter, Jimmy Carter was running for president, and he won. He got elected. It is generally assumed, and historians and political scientists have talked about this at length, that he was elected because of the teachers' union. Okay, now this would have been 1976. Okay, the election of Paul 76. And you say, well, why is it because of the teachers' union? The teachers' unions are relatively young. Labor unions, found became very popular back in 1900, 1910, 1920, 1930. The big labor unions, when they got their power in muscle like this, and they gained their power because of all the abuse that the workers were under, and workplace safety and all that kind of stuff. Teacher unions didn't start till much later because schools are a public sector organization. All right, public schools are public entities. They were not allowed to unionize like private companies could, like Ford and General Motors and so forth. You couldn't have a labor union in a school until President Kennedy in the early 1960s actually signed an executive order that's making it okay for public sector employees to unionize. So that began a slow little trickle of activity throughout the 1960s into the early 1970s, which created the teachers' unions. Their first big statement was they wanted Jimmy Carter, a Democrat, to be president. Okay. So he got elected in 1976. He won, he got elected. He was in office, and he got elected because he promised, when he was running his campaign promises, that he would make education a big national priority. And he was going to symbolize this by creating a brand new U.S. Department of Education. Up until that point, there had been a U.S. Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, Department of HEW, Health, Education, and Welfare. Now, I want you to think about that a little bit. Health, Education, and Welfare, in terms of all the federal policies that would link into that, and how they'd be connected by their department. So remember, our U.S. government functions with the president has a cabinet, and those cabinet officials are the secretaries of the different key departments. So Secretary of Defense. We have a brand new one, Secretary of Homeland Security. This is new after 9/11. Okay, so this is a bit malleable. There had never been a Secretary of Education. There's a Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare. Carter said, we are going to raise the visibility of education to the point where I'm going to make it a cabinet level position. All right? And he did that. But he didn't do it until 1979. It was right near the end of his term, right before the election was taking place, that he then lost to President Reagan. Or lost to Ronald Reagan, who became president. And so all of a sudden, he made education a cabinet level position. Ronald Reagan comes in with this very Republican notion that we need to make the federal government smaller. And he set his sights on the Department of Education. He said, this is brand new, we don't need this. We don't want federal leadership in education. This should be a state and local issue. All right? And so he commissioned a group called the National Commission on Excellence in Education, the NCEE. All right? That would make recommendations about education in this country. And their report, you could read online, was called The Nation at Risk. This report was so bombastic, it had such amazing language, okay, that the press actually covered this report, which is unusual for the Coleman report. Nobody covered, remember? So Nation at Risk people actually covered this because there was a phrase in there that said, if a foreign power imposed on us the results of our educational system, we would view that as an act of war. That's a pretty remarkable statement to put in a national report.
Could you say it again? Sir?
Sure. If a foreign nation imposed on us the results of our educational system, we would view that as an act of war. They're saying that's how bad our schools were back in 1980, 81, 82, when the report was released in 83. Okay. And there's a rising tide of mediocrity across the country. So this is when I was in high school. Okay, so I'm part of the rising tide of mediocrity, which you probably realized. Okay. And so this report then came out and said, we are a nation at risk. The very future of our country is at risk because our schools are so underperforming. This is dangerous, economically dangerous, socially dangerous. And so the report made this big hullabaloo, and all of a sudden the president is standing there, President Reagan, with this report. And he's trying to get rid of the U.S. Department of Education as a way to devolve power back to the states. And the report said, we have a national crisis, which was his own commission. You know, they handpicked this commission. And all of a sudden, there's no way he could do that. So the U.S. Department of Education is here to stay because it became a big national issue and a defense issue, which was recognized earlier in 1957 with the National Defense Education Act. Okay, that was the first time that the federal government had linked the caliber of the education we're providing with our national defense. So the 1957 law. Okay, and the 1957 law, just to keep stitching pieces together, that completely changed the conversation about what in this country. What was going on up until October of 1957 that then got put on the back burner when Sputnik and then DEA was passed. What was going on there? Desegregation. Okay. So we have Brown 1, Brown 2. Okay. We had all this activity around trying to integrate our schools, saying that this is the national scourge of this segregation. Okay, and we need to do better. And then all of a sudden, Sputnik went up, the NDA was passed, and we lost about 10 years on that. We got back to it. It took a little while. So that's what that report was. It's evidence for an important federal role in national security and the role that schools play in that. Okay, and it really secured this federal. But the irony of it is the whole reason Reagan created the commission was to disband the U.S. Department of Education. Okay? In every single election, we saw it in the last election. Okay, we certainly saw it 2 elections ago. Republican candidates will stand up and say, we need to abolish the U.S. Department of Education. This is a local issue. Okay. We did see on the screen one day the comments from President Bush when he signed the No Child Left Behind Act. He said, this is the proper role of the federal government is to give money, but not to control ideas. Those ideas should be held at the state and local level. So there's always this tension. This is one of these tensions between federal, state, and local connections. Okay, long answer to a quick question, but that's what that report's on. What else you got?
Can you go over the differences between the Committee of 10 and the Cardinal Principles?
Sure. And so this is a really, really important time in our country for many reasons. And there's a whole lot of reasons in 1895, what was going on. Okay, so the Committee of 10 was formed as a group of elite prep school and university folks trying to make a decision of what should happen, how should we educate, if at all, these kids leaving the primary schools. So what that signals is around 1890, we had firmly entrenched this notion of the common school movement that Horace Mann had said. Okay, we firmly entrenched this notion that we should have all kids going to primary school, grades 1 through 8. So when kids are 12, 13, 14 years old, getting out of primary school, if they were really wealthy, they were going to the Andover's and Exeters and the private academies of the world. Okay, if you had a ton of money, that's where you're going. So those folks realized the value of continuing education for 14, 15, 16, 17-year-olds. Okay, and then kids will leave there and go to universities. All right. So that group recognized the importance of secondary education, but it didn't exist in any public sense. All right. So that group was charged with identifying what should we do. Should we create a system that would educate the 14 to 18-year-olds in this country or not? And if we did, what should they learn? And of course, they were very biased towards this very elite, very kind of Latin-centric, very classics-centered education of the traditional intellectual secondary education of these private elite academies. Okay. So that's what they were biased from. But there's conversation, should they water this down for the rank and file person? Because the rank and file student, they would argue, couldn't handle this. Right? They weren't smart enough to handle this. All the really smart people were going to these really ritzy schools. And what they were saying is the wealthy people could handle this, and the poor people could not. All right? And the Committee was struggling with this. What should we do with the poor people? There wasn't much of a middle class at that point in time. They had a very small, wealthy group, and the masses were not well off. All right? And so this question was up. And so they debated, and this went on for 10, 20, 30 years until a new committee was formed. And they released their report called the Cardinal Principles. It was at 1918. Okay, so it's about 25-year period went by. And the Cardinal Principles became what we consider to be the answer. What do we do? And this is this notion of the comprehensive American high school. That yes, every kid should continue in school. Every kid should continue in school. Okay? And why was that again? What were some of the reasons why we had to keep kids in school when they were 14, 15 years old?
Because of the child labor laws.
So we had child labor laws, they couldn't work. So all of a sudden, you had a federal laws passed that 14-year-olds could not go out and work. 15, 16-year-olds could not go out and work. Okay, they couldn't do it unless they were working on a farm. There's a farming exemption. All right, so that was part of it. And the other part of it, what were the other laws that were passed at the state level? The compulsory attendance laws. So the compulsory schooling laws. The kids had to go to school between the ages of X and Y. Remember that little chart we had on the board? All those different dates and years when different states adopted those. So you You had states saying kids have to be in school. You had the Fed saying kids could not be working. And so all of a sudden the cardinal principles had to come up with a way to make school interesting and relevant for these kids who had no other place to be. Had no other place to be. And we had this idea that if we took two different communities, and we built different primary schools. Okay, a few different primary schools. Then we're going to then send all these kids to one common high school. Okay. Okay. And if you lived right here, you're going to go to that high school. If you live here, you have to go to that high school. Okay. And this is the attendance boundaries. And everyone in that area had to go to this school. So the cardinal principles, which again is a follow-up to the Committee of 10, same question, came up with these 7 principles for what these high schools should do. And if you remember carefully what they were calling for was civics. People should learn how to be a member of the civic society, be part of democracy. There should be some personal finance. People should understand how personal finances work. People are still calling for that today. We don't do a terribly good job on that at all today. All right. How do credit cards work and your own credit rating and so forth? We don't, courses don't teach that. But this notion here, that whoever's living in here was going to go to school together. This might have been the wealthy side of town. This might have been the poor side of town. They're all going to school together. This might have been the Catholic side of town. This might have been the Protestant side of town. This might have been the Jewish side of town. They're going to go to school together. This continued the notion that schools are the mechanism to bring people together and to reduce difference. Okay, reduce difference. All right, this is Mann's big thinking. All right, this was Jefferson's thinking back when he was going to break the genius of some thatch. He was going to reach into every neighborhood and try to find these really smart kids. All right, and you'd all go to high school, but then you get a bunch of kids in high school, some of whom are very motivated to study academics, some are not. Okay, some of them have different religions, different backgrounds, different races, different ethnicities, different languages, and they're all coming together. And so those cardinal principles, go back and look at those cardinal principles, because they're really interesting, and I would argue they are totally relevant today. Remember in class when I was talking about this, this is the lesson I gave to the prisoners up at the Auburn prison. Okay, and before I mentioned anything about the cardinal principles to them, I asked them, what should high schools today offer? What should high schools do in the best sense? Okay, what should they offer? And they came up with a list of 5 of the 7 cardinal principles on their own from the Auburn prison. Okay, you go back and look at those. This is what the comprehensive American high school is supposed to be. It was an experiment. It was different. Elsewhere in the world, okay, kids would be attracted to and pushed to different schools based on their backgrounds and interests. There's a religious school. There's a school for the wealthy. There's a school for the sciences. A school for the vocations. And all these different schools. Now, what you're noticing, with your age group, okay, you're seeing a return to this other system. We're getting away from this. We're getting away from this in a big way with all our choice mechanisms, all our residential segregation, okay, and so forth. But this was the idea that the America's promise would be that every kid would go to the same school, interact in the cafeteria, interact in phys ed, maybe interact in the art classroom, and then have different math classes, have different English classes, and so forth. And so you can still stratify. And that's to keep the different parents down. And we also talked about, that by itself probably is not interesting enough to keep kids motivated to attend. And we said the other, what else did schools start offering to make it motivating for kids to attend?
Sports teams.
Sports teams, band, clubs, marching band, yearbook club, all that kind of stuff, school newspapers, all that stuff came about because everyone in the community had to go and they had to make it interesting for kids. Okay. So those cardinal principles, okay, I'd be very curious what you think about them today and how relevant they are. All right. And they were a compromise, a great compromise. One of the principles was academics. One of the 7. You're really rich, strong academics. And the other 6 minutes. So you kind of stitch through these histories of where that came from, with the notion of trying to educate all kids. And this notion I broached last Thursday, that schools are both the problem and the answer, in my view. Do schools stratify tremendously? Absolutely. And you can see it in here. You can see it in the cardinal principles. You can see it in how the comprehensive American high school is set up. Do schools provide opportunity and growth and a chance to fundamentally change your life? They absolutely do that as well. And so you see this funny tensions in a school that David Lavery on last day class I had a really fun quote, saying that schools are in this awkward position between what we think we should be and what we know we are. And that's that tension that schools exhibit. Okay. And you can find good examples of upward mobility, and you can find examples of abject stratification and people like that aren't going anywhere. Okay. Any other comments on the Cardinal Principles Committee of 10? Because that's actually an enormous change. When that whole conversation was taking place, along at the same time as all the immigration was coming in, okay, the great migration from the south to the north, people moving from the countryside to the cities for economic opportunity because of the growth of factories around the turn of the century, the Industrial Revolution. There's all these factors at play that created this brand new system.
So just to clarify, the Committee of 10 wasn't the one who actually put out the cardinal principles. Correct. Because they couldn't decide among themselves what should be the standardized form of education, like whether it should be classic or practical stuff. Okay.
Very good. Yep. Because 25 years will pass, so those people probably all died. And different, this is one of these ongoing conversations that we overly simplify. But so I try to signal the start of that conversation was the Committee of 10, and then the conversation sort of finished, although we still debate it today. Sort of finished with those cardinal principles. Different group of people. So that's all that.
It was my understanding when reading it too that the cardinal principles sort of rejected the Committee of 10's idea that everyone should be taught the same thing in the same subject in the same way, like that.
Yep.
Part of it sort of suggesting instead that some subjects were more important and some students just had inherently different ways of learning. So to me that seems very much a differentiated style of learning. So I'm wondering how that fits into such a comprehensive and such a unifying. It just seems contradictory to me.
Yep. Really good. Really nicely said. Okay. And I support your idea that these seem contradictory. Schools are inherently contradictory. I think high schools in particular, because there's this unifying aspect. They want everyone to come together. We are the Ithaca Little Red. That is, we are all together in this. This is our team. It's our mascot. Some people don't find it very engaging to look at that mascot, but nevertheless, like a bulldog or something. But at the same time, those kids on the sports teams who represent the Little Red or the Bulldogs, whatever it may be, are attending probably very different classes as they go through school. So you got this the possibility for differentiation with, they didn't have AP courses back then, but with high level, the type of math and science that would send you off to Cornell, and the type of math and science that would send you off to the world of work, the business math kind of thing. So there is this inherent contradiction there, but the cardinal principles allow schools to stratify in that way. Now, there's been efforts in more recent years, we might call it the Common Core, to fix that issue. Because there's this notion that some kids are going through high school, the high school was built in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and aren't being taught anything. People say, this kid's walking in my classroom, that kid doesn't know anything. I know that kid's family. I see that kid's accent. He can't language. We're going to put him in the other class. And he said, wait a minute. There's a whole group of kids out there, generations of kids, that have not been taught much. We need to adopt a common core of curriculum so that all kids are taught something much more substantive. Okay? All kids can succeed at high levels. So ever since we set this system in place back in the 1920s, there have been pushes to more equalize the opportunity, okay, and to make things a bit more transparent. But as we saw in Berkeley High and how schools structure inequality, and those 8th graders who are coming into high school, those 8th graders who have been to private school or had parents who well versed in what course to take. They would push for algebra in 8th grade, and so they can get into trigonometry in 9th grade, and they can get calculus before they graduate. Those parents who did not know that, or those kids who went to different schools were not aware of that, would not do that. Take algebra as a 9th grader, and all of a sudden get totally different career tracks, university tracks. So we've had many, many efforts to overcome that, but that's part of that tension that all of you can get involved with your own local schools. By and large, most all of you, I would argue, benefited greatly from that system, okay, because you ended up here, and you all know people who did not have the opportunity to do it. They could not even begin to think about applying to Cornell because their coursework was so different, and the cardinal principles allowed that. So what seemed like such an elite idea of the Committee of 10, it was branded, oh, these elite, out-of-touch people who don't understand reality. We're actually saying all kids can learn at high levels. And the cardinal principle said, no, we understand kids have very different backgrounds and we can have very different expectations for them and have them engage in very different career paths. Okay. Which, one little nugget in there, can anybody take the notion of functionalism, okay, and bring functionalism into this conversation we're having right now? Around whether all kids should be taught the same thing in school or whether we should have a stratified set of offerings. Who can do that? Who can do it? Take a stab.
Well, I think the functionalist perspective would tend towards us like favoring a system with a sense of differentiation, because one could say that different groups in society have different skills or are primed to be effective in certain positions in society, and we need all of those groups. We don't just need people who go on to become university professors. We also need people
Certainly not.
who go on to do menial labor kind of jobs and everything in between. So
Very good. Very, very good. Okay, see how she did that? You take functionalism and you put that lens in front of your face and you say, okay, this notion of trying to meet kids where they are gives us a system, makes the schools a tool where we can prepare and build really fancy, expensive pieces of this machine and really cheap, inexpensive pieces of the machine. Because remember, this is the whole biological metaphor or machine metaphor, that a society, a community exists because all parts are humming along, doing what they're supposed to be doing. Okay. And a school that differentiates its learning, okay, would fit right in with this. A school that doesn't differentiate its learning, maybe it'd be this notion that everyone can learn at high levels. Everyone should be taking calculus. Everyone should be translating Catullus and all and whatever else. Okay. That doesn't prepare our society to have all these different pieces that we may need. Okay. So that's the tension. And this tension exists today. Do all kids get the chance to be at the highest level or not? And if they don't, or if they don't, and there's only limited slots, what kids get those opportunities? It's because of what they know, a human capital lens. It's what they know. And this is Jefferson's notion. If you know more, we'll keep paying for you and you'll keep moving through the system. Or is it who you know? The social capital, is it who you know? Many people say it's not what you know, it's who you know. For some of you, that's why you came to Cornell. This huge alumni network, that's why you came here, because it's who you know the rest of your life. And you'll make use of those networks. And the university promotes the use of those networks. All right, to succeed. Or maybe it's based on cultural elements, and that's who gets these opportunities. So you can use a capitalist framework as well to put those lenses in front of your eyes for who might get more opportunity or less opportunity in these comprehensive American high schools. Okay? You either earn it by what you know, you buy it with those with more money can buy it. It's what network you're part of, or what cultural elements you're in. Okay? And you can see how that would, which each of those different lenses makes a very different argument about who is going to be able to take on those elite positions in society. That make sense? It's those kind of connections that we want to be able to make. Really nicely done. Okay, what else?
I'm kind of switching gears, but a different sort of realm of the spectrum I'm talking about with the Swan case. Looking back at it, I think maybe I'm just unclear on what the rationale behind busing was, because it seemed like residential segregation as like the de jure form of segregation was constitutional, or is allowed. Is that not what was happening in North Carolina?
Very good. Great question. So let's all pitch in on this one. Okay, let's get the context. The Swan decision was what year? 1971. Very good. Okay. The Swan decision was the official sanctioned approval of the U.S. government and the constitutionality of allowing busing. Didn't force busing, but allowed you to use busing to desegregate schools. It was a mechanism that the Supreme Court said, yeah, that's okay, that's constitutional. Because the challenge was that it's unconstitutional. Okay, and the court said, no, it's okay. So what are we talking about? We're talking about a city. And let's make this nice and easy to see. Okay. So the city of Charlotte, let's pretend it's roughly like this. Okay. And it had schools all over the place. Okay. And again, it's a big area, a lot of people. It had some schools that were, let's make life 100% white. Let's just make it overly simplified. Okay. Some schools 100% black. All right. And then some schools are mixed. Mixed, black, white, and so forth. Okay, so you had this phenomenon, and this was all taking place post-Brown. So in 1954, the U.S. Supreme Court said, separate but equal facilities. So if you have roughly equal facilities, you've got classrooms, you've got teachers, you've got windows, you've got desks, and so forth. In this school versus this school versus that school. Separate is inherently unconstitutional. Separate but equal is inherently unconstitutional. So you got this problem with the schools all over the country. Okay? Where if the city says, well, all the white people live over here, so of course they're going to that school. All the black people live here, so of course they're going to that school. It's not our fault. It's not our fault that these schools are segregated. And the court says you're missing the point. You are operating a system that has separate facilities. Okay, claiming that they're equal. They're both getting a good education. And that's unconstitutional. So Charlotte had to do something. And they said the only way to do this is to start redrawing attendance boundaries and busing kids. Because the residential segregation was so great. Okay? So the busing began, and then of course someone brought that to court and said, well, you can't bus, that's an illegal remedy. It's an unconstitutional remedy. And so Swan essentially just reaffirmed that, yeah, no, busing's okay. So we're going to take some of these kids, or this part of the neighborhood here, and tie them into this school. Some of these kids will go to that school. Okay. Some of those over there. Some to this one, some to that one, and so forth. And you'd redraw the boundaries, which a school district can do inside their boundaries. You're not changing the district boundaries. The district boundaries stay the same. And you just busing kids around. Okay. So that was constitutional by the Supreme Court. So finish up your question for me. So what is the legal question that you're still struggling with?
I guess, because I think there was another case where didn't they decide that, like if you could prove that the reason for separation was because of residential patterns, like that's a form of de jure rather than de facto discrimination, so that's allowed? Like,
Okay.
is that the only sort of legal form of segregation?
So there's two other relevant cases. One is the Green decision. We did not talk about the Green decision, but it's on your review sheet with a star. The Green decision was, I believe, 1956. Is the date? Do I have the date on there? Is it 56? Okay. So shortly after Brown, there's a Green decision. And in Green, the school board was sued saying, you're not desegregated. And the school board said, well, we are making no one, we're not saying, we're not getting involved in this in any way, shape, or form. But it just so happens all the white people are choosing these schools and the black people are choosing those schools. They are acting of their free will. They are making their own choice, and we're giving them the opportunity to do that. That makes it fair. Okay, this is the Green decision. U.S. Supreme Court said, no, that's not okay. That is not constitutional. Because you still have separate facilities for black and white kids. Okay? So the Green decision reaffirmed that voluntary segregation doesn't make it constitutional. All right? That's really important. That was happening just 2 years after Brown, 1 year after Brown, too. Okay, 1956. So we're under the federal law that is saying people's individual choices aren't good enough to make segregation legal. Okay, so so that means the school district has the power to override individual choices and bus kids around. Now, what I think you're getting at is partly the Green decision, but partly the Milliken decision. There's the Milliken decision, 1974. So Swan was in 71. Milliken was a decision in Detroit. Let's pretend this is Detroit. There's the river. Okay, and you have this little area over here on the side of Detroit where Henry Ford used to make cars, called Dearborn. Okay, so Dearborn is a suburb right outside of Detroit. Detroit schools in 1974 were 90% black. Detroit says, how in the world can we desegregate our schools? Girl, how do we do it? There's only so many non-black kids, there's only so many white kids to move around inside the city boundary. Because Swan was about a school district, inside a school district. So Detroit said, well, if we're going to desegregate, the only way to do it is to reach out into the suburb. Reach out into the suburb here and desegregate. Because out here you had, by and large, we might have probably 95, 97% white. Okay? And so the desegregation plan in Detroit was to start mixing these kids in different schools. Because then you could actually desegregate, because you had white kids to mix in with black kids by reaching out into the suburb. Okay? So this was just 3 years after Swan. Just 3 years. Okay? And so this reaching out allowed them to integrate. A lawsuit was filed saying this is unconstitutional. You can't do that. You can't reach out to the suburb. It wasn't the suburb's fault that Detroit was 90% black. And the U.S. Supreme Court, just 3 years after Swan, and Swan was a 5-4 decision. 5-4. Okay? Milliken was a 5-4 decision the other way. And there were two, I believe it was two Supreme Court justices that retired in that little 3-year period. The Supreme Court flipped a little bit, and they made a very different decision. And so they said, this is unconstitutional, you cannot do that. And their famous saying was that it wasn't Dearborn's fault that Detroit was so segregated. I might beg to differ on that. But who am I? Okay. The court found that they weren't responsible for the desegregation of this school district, and so you can't desegregate across school district boundaries. You cannot desegregate across school district boundaries in a forced kind of way. You can voluntarily do it. Remember the Cleveland case we talked about? They tried to get the suburban districts to join in that voucher program, and not one of the suburban districts on Cleveland agreed to participate. So it can be done voluntarily, but you cannot force it. Does that help? Okay. Makes sense? So you got Brown, you got Swan, and you got Milliken, and you got Green in there. But the basics are that it's separate but equal, is inherently unconstitutional, and it's okay to bus. But you can only do that within inside a district boundary. So the Milliken decision was huge in stopping broader desegregation plans. Really, really important. What other questions you have? And so as you think about those court decisions, whether it's Brown or Swan, you can start to think about how you might use some of the theories and how you might use home effect, school effect, peer effect as to why we're integrating. What's the point of integration? What are we trying to accomplish? Okay, and you can use this language here to help you explain that, and you can use some of these to explain that.
Could you reiterate in terms of those three effects, which is argued to be the most powerful on the students'
Home effect. Secondly, peer effect, and thirdly, the school effect. Now let's define these a little bit. Let's define this a little bit, because this often, we talk about kids going to good schools and bad schools. Okay, and we'll go back to that conversation later on. But this notion that you're going to a good school, and if a kid from my language, a less resourced background, goes to a quote-unquote good school, what does that mean, going to a good school? That language doesn't help us very much. If a kid from a quote-unquote unresourced background, okay, less resourced background, is going to a school with a lot of better resourced individuals, okay, that peer effect can be quite powerful. All right. The peer effect is who you're sitting in the classroom with, who you're walking down the hallway with. Those are your peers. The school effect, in my language, how I'm trying to get you to think about this, is the quality of the chair in the room, the quality of the projector up here, the temperature of the room, the teachers in the buildings. Okay. So the school is what the school effect is what the school offers, and that's distinct from the peers. The peers are in the same school building, so you can see how these get clouded. The peer effect and school effect, they get clouded in there. Okay, so it matters a whole lot more who you go to school with than what resources are available in that school building. This is what the data has showed. Our Hill reading, which looked at all the research for 50 years after Coleman decision, supports that notion. Okay, supports that notion, and that's really important. Right. Doesn't mean that schools don't have an effect. Teachers do have an effect. Curricula does have an effect. The lighting and temperature of the room, the color of paint on the wall, these do have an effect. But they are dwarfed by the effect of the kid's home. I'm sorry, the kid's home and who the kid goes to school with. All right. And we can talk in terms, why does the peer effect matter? Well, if we talk in terms of the capitals, okay, that provides a different social network for you. And that different social network might give you access to, I was talking to one of you in here, who you're going through high school, you had no idea when to take the SAT. But all of a sudden, you're at the lunch table with your friends, they're all talking, oh, the SAT is coming up soon, the SAT is coming up soon. And this person went home and told their parent, I guess I'm supposed to take the SAT soon. And the parent said, I don't know. But the kid signed up because of his peers. It wasn't the school, it wasn't the guidance counselor calling the kid in, it was the peers. In this little story that somebody told me. Okay? So you can use this language here. Is it the social network that makes a difference? Is it because we then get into being exposed to different cultural elements? Okay? By being integrated. And that helps us in ways because we then understand how to interact with all kinds of different people. And the world's full of all kinds of different people. And that helps us in those ways. Okay? Maybe it's because people then buy us stuff. Maybe it's purely economic. If you get in that, the wealthier peers, if you have an economic lens in front of your face, okay, in front of your eyes. Maybe it's because more stuff is bought. Maybe. Okay. Or maybe they know more. So it's this kind of language you can help to explain why it is that the home effect versus peer effect versus school effect can have such different impacts.
So with the peer effect, if a low resource person is going to a low resource school, do you see the same amount of influence by their peers, or is it just kind of more less seen because it might be similar to their home effect?
Yeah.
Like, do we only see it, or is it only relevant when they're going to like a different system than their home?
Yeah, Coleman highlighted in those findings. Remember the complexity of the Coleman findings. And we took almost a whole class period. You guys discussed what Coleman found and tried to understand that. Because it got slippery.
Right.
Okay? And Coleman was very clear that if you came from a less resource background, and that might be less resource is not always dollars. Less resource could be this, it could be this, it could be this. Think about resources across this continuum. Okay? And it's not that there's no social network in a poor home. It's just the social network will offer you different things. There's value. The value changes depending on time and place and what function you're talking about. Okay? And Coleman was a big social capital guy. But I would argue there's more to it than just social capital. There's these others as well. Okay? So Coleman argued pretty persuasively that if you're coming from a less resourced home background and you're going to a school with other less resourced people, okay, you're not going to do well. Okay, and we know that high poverty schools, you define high poverty somewhere above 50 to 60% poor kids in the building. Anytime you get above that, and certainly about 70, 80, 90% poor kids in the building, those schools are really, really, really hard to improve. Really hard. Some charter academies, some charter networks have cracked that nut and have figured out how to get achievement up in those areas. But by and large, across huge numbers of schools, once you get up to 70% poor kids, the achievement is really, really hard to do much with. Okay. So if an under-resourced kid is going to a place where there's more resourced peers, okay, better resourced peers, that kid's achievement improves quite substantially. And that's what Coleman found, and many others have found since. So this brought this notion up, maybe we should bless kids. Okay? Now, our story here was just black and white. But you can do the exact same thing with wealthy poor. English language, non-English language. There's all kinds of different criteria which you can start blending kids, and the kids will be better off. Okay? Now, if you have a kid from a well-resourced background and going to a poorly resourced school, that kid, Coleman argued, is not harmed. Because the home effect is so strong. Okay? For that kid. And it buffers them against the reduced expectations or whatever else is going on in the under-resourced school. It's a really hard thing for parents to get their head around on that one. Okay.
I was going to ask, just to clarify, are you making the argument that high poverty schools are so difficult to improve because of those cultural and peer effects over?
I am saying they're so hard to change because the combination of the social networks in those schools, combination of social networks, the cultural, the variability of the cultural elements, the economic capital, which will be reduced in there, okay, and the human capital. Okay, we know by and large when teachers select what school they want to go teach in, the better teachers, quote unquote better teachers, across big numbers, across big areas, go to the wealthier places. It's just it's easier working conditions, better pay. All the financial incentives work in that direction. Okay, that's something we can change. That's a malleable thing. So it's not, it's across the range of these issues. It's the quality of the teachers, the quality of the lighting, the HVAC systems, the overcrowdedness, okay, the proportion of adults who are connected to that school through the other parents and the student networks, social networks that have gone out to college are much, much reduced. Okay? And so the information doesn't flow through those networks like it does around college applications as it does in other communities. So it's this whole broad range of issues. It's not a singular one. What do you got?
So the home effect is just kind of like everything that the school and peer effect doesn't touch. So like what that also general environment, demographic information, like everything else is kind of involved in the home.
Yeah, because there is another.
Because Because I know we talked a lot like recently about like community aware policies and like thinking about like communities as well as the
Yeah.
effect. So
Yeah, no, very good. Very good. There's also this neighborhood effect, okay, to distinguish from the home. So the home is where you spend most of your time with the family, and what resources are available there. And they're economic resources, it's knowledge resources, degrees and so forth. It's the cultural elements, and it's the social networks. So the inside that home effect, there certainly because of residential segregation, because of wealth segregation, racial segregation, ethnic segregation, language segregation, because of all that, the neighborhoods are looking much more like the peers than they used to. Okay, they used to be more mixing. There used to be more, and even in the earlier diagrams I was drawing here, you had a wealthy part of town and a poor part of town, but they all went to school together. Now we're getting the residential segregation seems so great that you're living with people of similar resource across all these different areas, okay? And your neighbors are kind of similar along those different areas. And so that's, but it is another variable. And so if you are living in an area with different cultural elements and different economic characteristics and different human knowledge, that has a different effect than if you're living in a homogeneous area. Okay. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, and with all due respect to some students on campus, there's the other end where you get a very homogeneous, very wealthy area that has no interaction with other languages, other cultural elements, other social networks, other economic conditions, and so forth. And they go off to school, and they have all the resources in the world, all the social networks in the world. But then they try to come upon their campus like this and interact with a variety of students, and they're ill-equipped to do that. Okay, so I think that this neighborhood effect can cut all kinds of different ways. And so this notion that people have, and I always cringe, that the only beneficiaries of integration are those from the poorer side. Not true. Not true. Okay? That integration, for the sake of integration, across any kind of mixing of people, is better for those children, better for those adults, because the world is not an isolated place. Now, if you're living in a gated community, and you take a private jet somewhere to travel, and you go to a private resort to vacation, and you work at your home, maybe your entire life can be lived in that bubble. But most of us interact with other people, and the ability to interact with others, other religions, other races, other languages, other accents, other whatevers, okay, is beneficial. So the benefits of the benefits of integration, okay, is very much a two-way street. Very, very much a two-way street. And let's not forget that. Okay, because that's often. What do you got?
Sticking with this, so the finding where a low-resourced child or a child from a low-resourced background going to a well-resourced school does better, how is that like reconciled with the whole mismatch idea? Because isn't that exactly what mismatch is?
Very good. So the fact that we can start busing kids into different schools. We're all set. Our work's done. All these kids are going to succeed now. We witnessed that firsthand in Hamilton High. We saw busing inside a school district in Syracuse, in Median. Okay? And it was a disaster because those teachers were so ill-prepared. Okay? All the stereotypes, all the stratification mechanisms that a school could engage in, they engaged in Hamilton High. Right? And so those kids who are being bused from Central High out to Hamilton High, up to Nottingham High School, those kids didn't benefit because the school itself has got to work at that. They got to be prepared at that and value that. Okay, there are other schools that have done much better than Hamilton High did. That was a disaster. Okay, but even Berkeley High, where you get a pretty integrated mix of people coming to Berkeley High, they still stratify quite dramatically. So the work is not done once you, quote unquote, desegregate. And that's why I often try to use to differentiate between the terms desegregate and integrate. Okay, we can desegregate but still have no integration, if you will, like Hamilton High did for a while. It got better in future years. But I think it's a really, really important point that just because you engage in some structural change, okay, it doesn't mean our work is done. You know, take the article about the ELL students. Okay, those were kids who were not even inherently under-resourced. I don't know what their resource background was, but they didn't speak English very well. Okay, and they were engaging in class with these different teachers, and the teachers treated them very, very differently than the other kids. Some teachers argue, well, to their benefit, you got to be tough for them now, or else it's sink or swim. That's what's going to help them. So even within that, once you make the structural change, you still have to do the instructional stuff that Delpit and others were talking about. Okay, so you can see the connections between some of the readings on what happens inside the classroom is critically important to supplement what happens outside the classroom, these other policy structural changes. Because you're absolutely right. Just now, on average across large numbers of kids, Coleman had these 600,000 kids that were part of the study. He showed that on average, you're going to benefit by attending a better resource school. But on any individual level, individual kid doesn't guarantee it. Just by coming to Cornell doesn't mean your whole life is saved and you're going to go off and be a zillionaire and be the happiest person in the world. It doesn't mean that. There's all kinds of micro interactions that take place in the Delpit article that's in a lot of that. In others.
Can we stop for a 1-minute stretch break?
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure.
He said everyone would benefit from the answer, so he's going to say it to everyone.
So in case you're curious, again, you have the option of taking the exam with us in person in Malat. I think it's Bayshall Auditorium. It's on the bottom of the weekly readings because there's room. On 9 a.m. on Thursday morning. And when you come into that room, you can do it with a laptop, or we will have blue books and paper for you. So you can either choice you want. We'll give you a new link because the link to everyone else will disappear at 9 a.m. on Thursday morning. Or remember, you can take it prior to 9 a.m. on Thursday morning. Final exam period starts Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. And the link to your exam will appear at 9 a.m. Wednesday morning. So you have all day Wednesday night, early Thursday morning. If you want to go and take it ahead of time, you are welcome to do that. You are bound by the Cornell Code of Academic Integrity and cannot talk to anybody about the exam, help them, or receive any assistance, but you're allowed to do that. And again, I said the reason we've always done this, is because typically the exam slot for this particular time of course is like a week later, or 10 days later. And people say, I can't wait that long. Everything else is done. I want to wait that long. So I made this option available for years. So you can do it online, on your own, in that 24-hour window this year. It's a much smaller window. Or come to us, 9 a.m. Baysh Auditorium in Malat. The room number's on and give yourself time to find the auditorium. Not sure where it is. And then you can take it on paper. Okay, bring your own pens and so forth. Or you can take it on the laptop. That's your call.
Did they bring the annotations printed or can it be on the computer?
That is your choice. Okay, some people like paper and flipping through paper. Some people like to scroll through. That's your call.
As we're going through and studying, are we allowed to edit our annotations?
You are allowed to, and the short answer is yes. You're allowed to add your annotations. You can make changes to your annotations because whenever you read through something you wrote 2-3 months ago, well, I wish I'd done better on that. I could, yeah. What? The only reason I hesitate, so the answer is yes. The answer is yes. The only reason I hesitate is the obvious one of you're not allowed to use your books and not allowed to use your notes and not allowed to use your slides from class. So the degree to which people would then take that stuff and just put in their annotations, that's my only hesitation. But that's, the Cornell Code of Academic Integrity covers all this stuff. So the rules are you have your annotations. If you want to enhance your annotations, great. In some kind of honest way, that's great. That's wonderful. Annotations, your work. You got 1 out of every 4 points you earn this fall is free annotations. We give you tons of points for those because it takes up so much time. And that's really a big crux of what we're doing here. So that's totally fine to go back and add to them, enhance them, change some language, make them more accurate about what's going on in the readings. But just know there's just that little bit that if for whatever crazy reason I ask to see your annotations and they all of a sudden have a bunch of text from slides in there or something, that's not very kosher. That's not the reason. Otherwise, annotations are yours, use them. Okay. The test is not about little micro recall. It's about you take the chance to share with us what you know. Okay. Make the connections that you see. Okay. Connect the dots on these things as best as you see fit. That's the idea behind this. It's a chance for you to show what you know. Okay. Think about it in that term, not trying to fit a very narrow standard of what we're trying to ask. Now we'll be very clear in our questions of what we're asking. Okay. But you make your best arguments.
This may be silly, but in the study guide you sent, each question was like use 2 to 3 readings to support this.
Yep.
We can use like the same reading a few times, right? Or no?
So read the directions carefully. You haven't seen
Should
it.
I read it again?
No, you haven't seen our new direction. So read when you open the exam, read the directions. Okay. Sometimes we will say, okay, you choose 3 of these 5 essays. There's 5 essay questions. Choose 3 of them. Sometimes you choose 1 out of 2. Sometimes whatever it is. Okay. Sometimes we will say you cannot use an author in more than 1 essay. Sometimes we might say that. Sometimes we might not. Sometimes we'll say, use 3 authors to illustrate the complexity of this, the implementation of this policy or something. And we'll just leave it at that. Sometimes we'll say, use Grant and Nagura and 2 others. Okay? I will never ask you for a specific author if we give you choices of that author. There's different weeks, so somebody's got a choice of this or that. I won't ask you about those. Okay, like Grant. Everyone had to read Grant. I may ask you about Grant. Okay, or use Grant and 2 others. So it's that kind of thing. Okay, like this. So just the instructions will be clear. And I've done it different ways, different years, depending on the final versions of the question.
2 quick questions. So you said that you can only ask a question if we've all for sure read it. But what if there was like do an annotation on like 3 of the 4? Is that like how that?
So what I will do is say, okay, let's take school choice. There's a huge push for increased school choice by Betsy DeVos and the federal government right now. Okay, bring in 4 readings. Bring in 4 authors, and you talk about social and economic capital in light of a new voucher program or something.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever choices you had, you bring in what you know.
Okay.
You bring in. So I'm not going to ever say, I'm not going to give you a list of these 3 authors that you might not have chosen one of those.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Anytime I mention an author specifically, it's because everyone had to read that author, and I'm very careful about that with the questions.
I mean, technically, we like had to read the other ones. Just I don't have like an annotation on it, so I don't remember it as well. So then you're saying I wouldn't be like in trouble. I could still use the other one I did write the annotation for. Okay.
We try to give you room to share what you know.
Okay.
Okay. And if for whatever reason you find one of these questions just unfair for this kind of reason, just come let me know. And we'll negotiate. Okay. I don't think we're in any danger of that kind of issue happening. But if you find any of these questions just blatantly unfair, like any other assignment, you get your week to question our grading. All right. Another question?
Yeah, sorry. I have a question about the court cases.
Yeah.
Is there like a high chance of you just giving like a name, like multiple names of court cases, and then we should just be able to know exactly what they're about without like, are you going to give us a little bit of context? Because I feel like once I have like a sentence of context on a court case, I can like know it.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
based on a name, I might not.
Given that I allow you should bring your annotations in.
Mm-hmm.
And given that some of the annotations are about court cases, but not all. Okay. If there's a court case that I want you to think about, I would probably give you a little context around that. Especially one like the Green decision, which we didn't even talk about in class. Okay, or Milliken, we didn't really talk about in class. I think the main ones that you wrote annotations are just totally fair game. But again, all this whole laundry list, I got the electronic version, but the laundry list of your review sheet, get familiar with as much data as you can, and bring the best stuff. You don't need to memorize all. It's not about memorizing it. It's about being able to construct an answer. Why is the home effect and peer effect? Why are they so powerful in in integrated settings, what have three authors that talk about the pros and cons of that, and talk in terms of functionalism, and then you bring in whatever you can bring in. So whatever makes your argument stronger. So bring your best stuff.
This might be a dumb question, but first, like if we were given a prompt on like school choice and you said like bring in like 4 readings, are the documentaries considered a legit source? It's like the Teach Us All one that we watched is like extremely relevant.
Oh, like the nighttime movies?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, why not? Yeah. And bring what you know. It's about the quality of your argument more than sort of the yeah. It would be fine. It'd be fine.
Can we go over accountability a little bit?
Sure. So accountability. This is one of those threads that have been around for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. Who is accountable to whom? All right. And this is a real. If you think way back to the earliest things we had, the deluder Satan. Who is accountable? It's very unclear from that one little paragraph policy back in the 1600s that required all communities in Massachusetts that had at least 50 families to hire a teacher and run some sort of a little school, again, to keep Satan away, very religiously oriented. The accountability that's very unclear, but there's still this notion that if we're going to, the state's going to make you do something, how do we make sure that they do it? How do parents hold schools accountable? Okay, and public schools, you hold schools accountable by one, bickering with teachers and principals, but you have a public vote on school board members, and you have a public vote on budgets typically. Okay, that's one form of accountability. All right. When choice mechanisms, the accountability is, well, I'm pulling my kid out of your school, and they're going someplace else. That's how we hold you accountable. So it means many different things, but the basic core is that how do we make sure that the school or the classroom or the teacher or the kid is doing what we expect them to do? Okay, and we've had a zillion different examples throughout the course of what that might look like. So if we, let me just try to make up a question on the fly here. There have been a variety of accountability mechanisms over the years, over the last couple centuries. Describe how accountability differs in the voucher programs versus the traditional comprehensive American high school kind of thing. Okay, bring in 3 readings to talk about that, 3 authors. And so you have all this stuff at your disposal. So with everything on that review sheet at your disposal, what would you bring in to kind of illustrate how accountability looks different? It looks very different in those 2 settings. So it's just one of those kind of vague terms that pervades the course accountability. That control issue. Who's in charge? Is slightly different than accountability. And how do you change who's in charge? Good questions, thoughts. I want to make sure this is useful to you. So ask what's useful here.
Can we talk a little bit about finance stuff? Maybe
Sure.
property versus income law?
Sure. Okay. So the finance stuff. Remember, my goal with finance is to make sure that everyone who graduates from this course has some basic idea of how we finance schools. Not a real hyper detailed explanation, because it varies from state to state and all the details differ. But the basic notion. There's 3 sources of revenue, by and large, for school districts. Whatever. State aid, local tax levy, federal. Very nice. Okay, so that's one thing you gotta know. Okay, you get money from 3 different places. Very good. All right. Traditionally, back in the olden days, let's say 150 years ago, who paid for most of schooling? Was it the state? Was it the feds? Was it the local? Local. And there's that chart you have that shows that graph over time, the last 100 years, 150 years. It shows these 2 lines, local shares up here, state shares here, and they're coming together like this thing. Okay. So back in the day, locals paid for everything because the state governments had a very weak effect. They had very little power. And states got more power. They got power by paying for more in the schools. So a rough proxy for control and a rough proxy for accountability is how much money the state is going to be giving. Okay? And the state share has increased dramatically over time. Now, this is on average for all districts. Right? You can go find that slide. What we also know is that some communities have the ability to levy lots of money locally. What are some characteristics of those communities? What's one characteristic? High property value. You got a lot of property value, a lot of taxable property value. And it might be a mall, it might be a factory, it might be industry, it might be big mansions, it might be who knows what. Okay, stuff that has high property value. Not a university, not a set of churches. Remember, those are not taxable. Okay, so a community that has a lot of taxable property can levy a lot of local taxes. You know that one formula we had. I've asked you to remember one formula all semester, and it's who knows what it is. Who knows what it is? It's one formula all semester. Give you a hint. It starts with property value.
The property value times local tax rate is the local tax levy.
Beautiful. Okay, remember this is the 6th grade thing we did. Okay. Property value times the tax rate equals your local tax levy. Your local shit, your local dollars. Okay? Property value times tax rate. Now, the only thing tricky about that are property values, the numbers get big. You get a big number. You know, hundreds of millions, sometimes billions of dollars. Okay, and then property value, making those numbers can get big. And the only other thing tricky about it is that tax rate. If you ask any superintendent, board president, finance director of a school district, what's your local tax rate? What's your mill rate? Let's say 17, 21, 32. Okay? When they say 32, the tax rate is 0.032. When they say 17, it's 0.017. Remember, there's that moving the decimal point 3 spaces. The reason for that, the way to remember that, is that a mill is $1 of tax per 1,000 of assessed value. $1 of tax per 1,000 of assessed value. So it's 1/1,000. So you move the decimal place 3 spaces. Okay. So the mill rate might be 15, and you multiply by 0.015. That's that, and then the big numbers are the only thing complicated about that. Okay. So I might give you the mill rate. I might give you the tax rate at a 0.0 something, but that's your formula. So and we did those actually. We did this a day or two where you kind of mucked around with all the data and the different data tools. Okay, and you filled out this little homework sheet, and you learned that communities with high property values can levy a lot of local taxes. Okay, and if you want to know how it's comparable district to district, you divide by number of pupils. So you do a per pupil assessment, which makes it much more relevant. Because it's not quite so important that a community that is 50 kids has a tax levy of 50 million, and a community of 3,000 kids has a tax levy of 60 million. One looks wealthier, but you do it on a per pupil basis. It's just divided by number of pupils, and you get a property value per pupil number. Okay. So there's that kind of notion around finances. So some communities have a lot of property tax, some have just a little bit. Okay? The property tax rate is roughly a proxy for what? It's a proxy of what? The tax rate represents degree of local effort. Nice. Okay? So if you have a tax rate of 0.005, you're not working very hard, okay, to levy your taxes. A tax rate of 37, that's a big number. So just in ballpark, anything below 10 or 12 or 15, I consider it relatively low tax rate, a low tax effort. And something above 25 or 30 or 35 is a really high tax rate or high tax effort. Okay. So if a wealthy community, and you did the math on this in your homework, you realize they can have relatively low tax rates. No, some actually tax themselves quite rigidly. And they're at 27, 28, and they're trying pretty hard. Conversely, a poor district, a property poor district, might have a property tax rate of .037, and they can't generate much at all, much local revenue. They just can't generate much. So the state then backfills. Remember? So we start with the local levy. Some levy a lot, some in the middle, some low, and then the state tries to balance that out with the state aid. Okay? So your state aid in a really poor district might be upwards 80-90% of the budget comes from state money. In a really wealthy district, the state aid might only be 5% or 8% or 12% or something. And on the average, no. An average district is probably roughly 50-50. So in terms of finance, it's this kind of conversation. So what you get with this kind of conversation are clear implications of equity. Remember our term equity. We define that as different from equal or equality by how? Let's give a definition of equality versus equity for the purposes of this class.
Equity is unequal inputs.
For more equal outputs. Yeah, so unequal inputs for more equal outputs is equity. And what's equality?
Equal inputs.
Equal inputs for that would give you more unequal outcomes. So think in terms of state aid, in terms of equity. Okay. So states give a lot more money to poor districts than wealthy districts. That's a form of equity. It's uneven inputs by the state, trying to achieve more equal outputs. Okay. And that's a pretty important concept. Right? The state's trying, and then we know there's 38, 39, 40 court cases around the country, might be in the low 40s now, and trying to determine whether the state has met its constitutional obligation to fund its schools. Okay, and about half the states have been, the court says, yeah, you're doing okay, you're fine. Other half the states say, no, you're not doing okay, and you need to remedy the situation. And so, hence, you need to give more money to the poor districts. That's about the finance conversation, and that's about it. The example about the Big Red School District and so forth, you do some simple calculation, and the question there on the review sheet is, the goal is to hire 3 more teachers. And there's 2 different districts. Okay? And you do the calculations, and with a 1% increase in the tax levy, are both districts able to hire 3 more teachers? Okay, you do the math and you realize, what's the answer? Everybody done it?
The rich district can hire 4, and the poor district can't hire a single one.
Okay, so the 1 mil increase in the tax levy, the poor district can't even hire a single teacher with this additional local money. But the wealthy district can hire not only 3, they can hire 4. And it's just simple math to get there.
In that question, does the fact that each district has 1,000 students matter?
I always try to keep life simple for you.
Okay.
And to kind of control the relative, a district of 50 kids versus a district of 5,000 kids, we have 3 teachers would mean something very different. So if they're both 1,000 students, that's my attempt to kind of steer the question artificially to make it make more sense.
Okay, but it doesn't matter for like the calculation.
Well, it's holding that constant.
Okay.
Sorry.
I have a kind of specific question. What's the difference between equalization aid and compensatory aid?
Good. Okay.
And like, where would that come from the state?
Yep. So remember that funny pseudo hand-drawn image I gave that showed from wealthy districts to poor districts, and it was showing the different pieces of that, and there's foundation aid on the bottom. So foundation aid is that the state has determined that every pupil in the state will receive this much for their district. So there might be for books, it might be for transportation, something that's not instructionally related. And so there's basic foundation aid. So that's the same for everybody. Okay. In different states, some states give virtually no foundation aid. Some states give quite a bit. Okay, and there's political implications of that. Because the thicker that bar is at the bottom, so if you're giving much more foundation aid, then for the really wealthy districts, you're giving them much more state aid than they probably need. Okay, that's the implications. But you might get the legislature to pass that because those people are quite powerful and represent those areas. So that's the foundation level. The equalization aid is on top of the local the local aid. So once the local tax levy comes in, and you get that very unequal distribution, equalization aid tries to equalize that. So that's the state money plopped on top of that. Okay, so on that little diagram that we saw a number of times, that's the state aid is your equalization. Okay. Compensatory aid. This is from the federal government. Okay, in the context of this class. And this is essentially your Title I money. This is money that's meant to compensate for having a bunch of poor kids in your school. This money must supplement and not supplant the local effort. So, for instance, you're running a poor school district, and the federal government wants to give you $3 million, okay, out of the Title I ESSA money. A few years ago, it didn't need NCLB money before that, the ESEA money. It's all part of the same law. Okay, and the federal government wanted to give you a bunch of money. You could not then reduce your local tax effort to save your local taxpayers and just kind of cost shift them. The federal government watches that carefully. So the money that they give has to supplement, not supplant, that local effort, the local money or the state money. And so the compensatory money, which is Title I, compensates for the notion that you have to teach a bunch of poor kids, and you know poor kids are more expensive to teach than non-poor kids. So that's the federal Title I money, is the compensatory money. If you have no poor kids in your community, you don't get any of that. The feds aren't going to give you any. If you have a lot, you get a lot. And that's on a typically a per pupil basis, but per poor pupil basis. And again, the finance stuff, there's a little technical questions that could be asked about the money, but then the more important questions are, okay, should the state, what happens when the state does, like in that homework example, gave a 5% cut in state aid? How fair is that? Is that a smart public policy move? Is that reasonable? You should be able to answer that kind of question. Okay. Versus if it's, they're going to give everyone, the state all of a sudden's got new money, everyone's going to get a 3% increase in state aid. Is that smart public policy? I think that through a little bit.
I have a question that goes back to the accountability conversation, but I'm a little confused about the mismatch between like the Common Core standards and then what they were actually like testing on, and like why the teachers were getting angry and exactly like what that tension was.
Yeah. So with that whole conversation, I think it is important to make sure that's clear. Because when you talk to any teacher these days, or any administrator, you're on home on break, or you talk to a relative, or whatever, these issues will come up. This is part of their life. Okay. So the Common Core, at its heart, are just these learning objectives. Just these, and you saw them, we looked them up. Okay, some of you did it on your own, we looked at some of them in class. And just these objectives of what math knowledge or what literature knowledge that these students should have. So they're not lesson plans, they're not activities, they're not teaching people how to teach. It was just kind of what you should be trying to, what the students should be able to do when you're done teaching. So that's the Common Core. But the Common Core came down the pike at the exact same time as a bunch of other things. We had that conversation about the race to the top incentive program that the feds are running. Right when every state was in dire fiscal trouble, right after the recession, in 2008 and 9 and 10, states were really in trouble. So they were taking any money they can get. New York State, as an example, which spends over $60 billion a year on K-12 schooling, was chasing $600 million in the race to the top. Now, $600 million sounds like a lot of money. Well, do the percentage. What is $600 million as a percentage out of $60 billion? 60 billion is real money. Okay, 600 million is less than 1%. It's chump change. Okay, but New York State fell all over themselves, as did other states, to get that money. In doing so, they had to adopt the Common Core. Well, they shouldn't say it. The feds would say, no, they didn't have to do anything. They chose to because extra points were given in the contest. And it was a contest. So if you adopt the Common Core, you got extra points. So let's call it. Man, let's try that again. So you get an extra 10 points to adopt the Common Core. You also got 10 points if you link teacher or student achievement, if you link student achievement to teacher evaluations. So that got tied in. Okay, we'll get an extra 10 points. We want the 6.9. We'll do that too. We're gonna link student achievement. Well, student achievement is measured by these tests, right? Okay, and the tests, when the Common Core was coming out, were not designed for the Common Core. The tests were designed for whatever the previous state curriculum was, curriculum frameworks. Okay, so you had this really quirky phenomenon where they're being asked to do new things with the course objectives, essentially. Okay, but also linking student achievement to teacher evaluation. And you had the I don't know how many points there's. Olivia, do you remember how many points they got on these things? Yeah. I'm not making up 10 points, but it's some points. Okay. Also 10 points if you increase the number of charter schools in the state, or at least remove the cap of the number of charter schools. Now that's got a very indirect effect. If all of a sudden there's more charter schools in the state, this puts more pressure on the local school budgets. Because remember, the money is taken from the public schools to give to charter schools. So to answer to your question, we got this linking of these two issues, even though they're quite separate from each other. Yeah, this is what it is. But it all comes down to the accountability and the assessment part. And that's what really drove the teachers nuts, is that they were being held accountable by looking at the students who take these tests, which were not yet based on a Common Core. And how well the students did year to year would determine whether the teacher got a good or bad evaluation.
And that was all driven by race to the top.
It was all incentivized by this. It's sped up. Okay, sped up.
So
Because I think without the race to the top, some states would have done this, and some states would have eventually changed their accountability system, but the stakes would have been quite low, and it would have been much more under the radar screen.
So it's like the double punch of like Common Core coming at the same time as race to the top.
Totally. Totally. That put the screws to the teachers. They really did. And the policymakers are falling on themselves to link these things up. And it happened very quickly. And like other things we've seen in this, go back to Hamilton Highway integration. If they had time, if they took time and resource to prepare, it might have gone better. We've seen other places that have gone better. This might have gone better. It was a disaster. What else would be useful to you? Did you look through the course?
I see there's charity schools and the New York Free School Society.
Yeah.
And there's no star next to it, but I don't remember.
Okay. Yeah. We covered that very briefly. So very, very briefly. And this is just part of the broader historical story. Remember the notion, at its core, okay, we've always had this funny tension between religious enterprise, religious agencies, churches, synagogues, and public money. Okay, we have this broad separation of church and state. And so when we began in the early 1800s to educate kids, okay, because we saw the need for numeracy and literacy and kids were being educated in different places, it quickly came up, well, who's going to fund this thing? Back to dilute or Satan, way back, it was just a local responsibility. Okay? When Jefferson was talking, there's still localities paid for it. Okay, there's no state money that was going to come with that whole system. So if you've got a system that's based on local spending, and you then have a bunch of kids in a city, in New York City, who are coming in from the countryside, coming in from other countries, immigration coming in from the south. Okay, a bunch of kids, all of whom are poor, all of whom by definition are poor. Who is going to pay for the education of those kids? All right, New York City, wasn't yet stepping up to the plate, but churches did. And remember, the Lutheran Church created a Lutheran school for kids. A Catholic church created a Catholic school for kids. A Methodist church would create a Methodist school for kids. And they would serve their own kind. And then finally, one day, the Quakers stepped in and said, we're going to take any kid. Any kid in the city who doesn't have a place to go, they can come to our school. We don't care what religion they are. Or they can have no religion. Okay? So these became these charity schools. Okay? That churches would give money, or churches would pay themselves to run a little school. So because they were free. It was the early bit of free public education paid for through charity work. All right? And then these agencies who were running, the churches running this, kept going to the state saying, state, you should pay for this. City, you should pay for this because this is in the best interest of your city. The externalities, the neighborhood effect, the spillover effects of schooling kids, it will benefit the city, will benefit the state. It shouldn't just be the responsibility of the churches and these charity organizations to pay for this. It shouldn't. And the state kept saying, no, because you're religious. We can't give money to religious organizations through the separation of church and state. The Quakers figured this one out. They said, okay, we are going to be a non-religious, a-religious schooling system. Okay? Now give us money. And the state of New York and the city of New York said, okay, you're no longer religious. You sure? They went and looked, there's no Bible in there, there's no cross on the wall, there's no whatever. Okay, we'll give you state money. That's when these charity schools and the Quaker New York State the New York Free School Society became the New York City Public Schools. It was that switch when the city started paying for it and the state started paying for it because they took out any obvious link to religion in their program. Catholic system said, please give us state money. We need all kinds of state money for our schools here. The state said, no way. Not until you give up the cross on the wall, give up the Bible, and give up your religious instruction. Not until you do that will we give you money. And the Catholic Church today, right through today, has refused to give that up. So they still don't get state money. So it's the charity school thing was really the early foundations of how we paid for public schooling. They were free schools for kids. Right? And they're typically paid for by churches. Sometimes. And then that changed when they removed the religious nature of their instruction and that allowed the state to give them money. And that became the New York City Public Schools. I remember we did that very quickly one day in class. I apologize for that. So if you ever wonder what was the early roots of the New York City Public School system, it was 1.1 million kids now. It was the Quakers. What do you got?
Can you talk a little bit more about like redesigning our system like in the future?
Sure. So as we think about think about what we should do in the future, and this is where we're all on the same boat. All of us, I think, and I've gotten emails from several of you the last couple of days, I think are motivated, at least to some degree, to go do something. Okay, to make this system better and work for more kids. So as we think to the future and what systems should be altered, changed, tweaked, that kind of thing. The whole point of the course is to understand the past so we can then make better decisions in the future. So we know where these systems came from. That's kind of the whole point of the course. That's why we do so much history. So as we look to the future, I want you to really think carefully. What is it that could and should be changed? Should there be more accountability? Should we do more of this linking of student achievement with teacher evaluation? This version of the accountability? Should we think about accountability in a different way? What if we gave everybody 100% choice? What if there were no public schools as we know them today? And every parent got a voucher for $20,000. Go do with it what you want. You can homeschool your kid. You can take a vacation with that money. Do what you want. Give the parent the money. Let parents choose. Should we do a voucher system that gives a $30,000 voucher to poor special needs kids, or a $50,000 voucher to poor special needs kids, $20,000 voucher to poor kids, a $2,000 voucher to wealthy kids? Should we do it that way? Should we have much more in common of what's being taught? Are we so splintered as a society because we have no centralized curriculum? Should we be more centralized in structure of our curriculum, like most other countries around the world? Or should we say, You guys are all teachers here. You go back to your whatever class you're in. Do whatever the heck you want. Use your expertise. Let the school board decide if they want to keep you. And me as governor, I'm going to stay out of this. Just educate the kids the best you want. I think it's these kinds of options that are on the table. Okay? And I think this is where I don't have the answers for what's going to happen in the future. But you should start to see where these opportunities are. And I think curriculum, should we let it be more localized or more centralized is a huge question. Should we have more choice or less choice for parents? Our model we had up here earlier, where everyone's going to the same school, the new comprehensive American high school idea. There's no choice at all in that. Zero. It was meant to be community-based. Let's strengthen our communities. Is that a priority? So it comes down to individual priorities. What's important to you? The rights of the individual, being able to have free will and free choice. The community. And you go back to these options here. Some of this language up here, with whether the priority, the goals for the future, is about allowing every child to maximize their potential. Is that the standard? Or is it should we really try to strengthen communities? Or do we strengthen individuals by strengthening communities? This is our community-aware idea. Okay. And I won't give you extra bonus points just for writing about that, but I'd be curious to get your thoughts. I read your pre-class question responses to that community very well. Pretty interesting thoughts from many of you. Pretty interesting thoughts. Okay. Well, what does that look like? What does that look like to really try to strengthen families and strengthen communities? In this country where we have such a stranglehold on public schooling with getting $600 billion a year. And that money does not go out into that community. But we also have a system that we know, we've looked at it, that some kids walk into the classroom and they get totally ignored. Some kids are shuffled off to another classroom down the hall and they're not taught anything. And that would be, if we just let things go, with no accountability, no insight, no government oversight, maybe that's where it would go again. Maybe. Maybe not. But those are the tensions that I want you to think about as you move into the future. What can we do? We give parents more choice or less? More common curriculum or less? Okay. More coherent textbooks or less? More testing, less testing? There's a lot of people pushing for less testing. A lot of people. A lot of people on the left end of the political spectrum. We got to get away from this testing. How do we then know who's being ignored in the schools? How do we know? Maybe we know. Anyways, without that testing. We could take all the money spent on testing and put it to different use. But these are the questions. Okay. You guys might have other thoughts. As you look into the future, what could be done? What are some of these tensions that we've talked about? How do we increase the human capital, the physical capital, economic, cultural, social? How do we foster social capital in the age of choice? If the group of parents that's screaming the loudest for choice are the poorest parents among us, those are the ones who really want choice because their schools, they send their kids to, they know are crummy. How do we give them the social capital to make the choices on what school to send their kid to? How do we provide enough economic capital to make that happen? How do we recognize when different cultural elements are valued and devalued in different places? How do we learn that? So as you look to the future, those are the tensions. Or if you have other ones, please share. Other thoughts on where we can go?
I kind of have a question actually. In No Child Left Behind, didn't they have, they would publish, data that said that certain, demographics in schools were achieving at higher rates, they were graduating at higher rates than other students. Why, did they get rid of that? like that.
So as Olivia described last week, that part, the disaggregated reporting, that's called disaggregated reporting. So if you ever get in a conversation, somebody says, well, we should get rid of disaggregated reporting. It's too expensive for the schools. What it means is, are we going to report test scores broken out by special ed versus non-special ed, poor versus non-poor, black versus white versus Hispanic versus whatever? Okay. That's the disaggregated reporting. And I had that little chart from the Ithaca data. I didn't tell you what school it was, but that was Ithaca. It had the 82% graduation rate, or whatever it was. And then you disaggregated it, and all of a sudden you realize, oh my goodness, there's a lot of inequality in it, okay, in terms of performance. If we get away from disaggregated reporting, we lose all that data. Okay, right now, but as Olivia said, no, they kept that. They kept that. But the criteria by which you are now measured is now completely up to the states. They've evolved that. There's no more federal guidance, if you will, on what should be reported. But you still need, whatever you're reporting, you got to disaggregate by race and wealth and special ed populations and ELLs.
In the last question on the review sheet, it says to identify reforms. For that, do you mean to for us to look at the market right now and see and make up our own reforms, or identify actual reforms that have been stated in the media, a voucher program?
This comes from a question probably 3 or 4 years ago. The final exam for this course consists of one question. One question. And it was only like a sentence or two. It said, you've been studying the U.S. educational system for 3.5 months now. What should we do to reduce the inequality, the persistent inequality? What should we do? That was it. Use 7 or 8 authors to support your claims in court cases and laws or whatever. Bring all that in, and you go with it. So you could use pre-existing ideas. You can come up with new ideas. They got to be supported with evidence as best we can in the final exam for what you think we should do. Okay. That was the entire final exam. So as a signal to you, we often don't look for we're not looking for particular answers. We want you to engage with the material and you to put out what you know. You lay out what you know. Okay. I'm not saying we're going to ask just one question this year, but it's that kind of response that you have all the course to bring to bear to support your arguments. Okay, and you can show the contradictions, the good and the bad, which is I think you've all gotten this from me that there's no singular right answer on this, and there's no singular wrong answer on this. There's such a mixed thing. So showing that nuance, showing how some of the authors have showed the strength of that, some show the weakness of that, who's helped and who's harmed. That's what we're looking for. Okay. So I go back to one of the first statements I made today. I want to give you a chance to share what you know. Okay. And I'll put some parameters around that. But that's kind of the idea.
So you haven't told us the structure of the exam. We're going to walk into it and just
Yep.
know.
It's going to be essay writing. And maybe one question, and maybe 5, and you choose 3. It's all no matter what we ask, you're going to be asked to bring in some theory. Bring in, have this kind of language. We may say bring in at least one policy or report a court case or something. We'll ask you in general terms for stuff to bring in, but it's on your plate. It's what can you bring to the table to make the argument. Because as you've noticed, there is no singular answer.
Can you talk a little bit about voucher programs?
Yeah. So voucher programs are a different form of school choice. We talked a lot about charters. Okay, in charter schools, we had that exercise. We had a principal in the back, 2 principals up here of these charter schools. And whenever they attracted a student, money would go with them to the charter school. And money's taken away from the public school. That's the charter model. The voucher model is that whoever qualifies for a voucher will be given a voucher worth X number of dollars. And that person can then take that voucher and go to a public school, go to a Catholic school, go to a yeshiva, go to wherever you want to go, and just try to pay the tuition with that voucher. Because it's totally a free market system. So you might have your own personal funds to supplement with the voucher funds. There may be financial aid given by the private school. that might supplement the voucher. But the idea is just to put the power in the hands of parents where you want your kid to go to school. As long as there's room in that school, you take your voucher and go have the state pay for part of it.
So it's not like one sum of money. So it really depends on like each family's.
It's one of the tricks of talking about vouchers because the programs vary so much around the country. There's not that many programs to start, and that where we do our programs, they range from as low as like $3,000. Some vouchers like $3,000, and you can take that $3,000 go to any school you want. Well, not many schools charge $3,000, so you're probably gonna need to supplement that with something. Some vouchers are worth $10,000. Okay, the vouchers in Cleveland that we talked, the one case we really talked about with that Zellman decision in Cleveland, I think the vouchers are worth $6,000. Does that ring a bell? I think it's about $6,000, which is roughly the cost of the Catholic schools at the time. $6,000 per kid. But you can take a voucher to a public school, because most states, if you live in one district and you want to go to a different district, you would have to provide your own transportation and then provide tuition into that public school. So public schools often charge tuition to people who don't live in their area. It's a district choice that they can take it or not. Okay, they're allowed to. And they just have to charge the same rate for anybody coming in. They can't selectively charge more for some kids than others. It's got to be equal. And that tuition could be $25,000. It could be $500. But your voucher might help them there. But it might not. So the voucher programs are hard to talk about because the key is the nature of the specific program. But in the abstract, it's a certain dollar value is given to a parent, and the parent can send it to wherever they could then muster up the resources to send it.
Did you ever get a voucher to your public school in your district because you don't get charged anything? I know you get charged a lot of money for going to like the next public school district.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you're already in your own district, you go there.
So there'd be no. Okay.
Yeah. So you just got to opt out of the voucher program to just go to your local school.
Are charter schools encompassed in voucher programs, or is it a different source of funding?
You could imagine charter schools participating in a voucher program. The degree to which charters, they would probably be, if they're going to participate, they'd probably be bound to just take the value of the charter, and that's all they could ask for. But the value of the voucher, that's all they could ask for. Because they can't negotiate with different public schools for what the rate is. The rate's just set by the state. So I'd imagine if a voucher program was going to include charters, they would just, whatever the voucher is, they would just have to take it. And they agree to participate or not. Not selectively kid by kid, but just in the program.
I have a question about something completely different. In the Milliken versus Bradley case, they ruled that segregation that was not mandated. If it was just accidental segregation, so to speak, that was.
So this is the Detroit case. There's Dearborn and there's Detroit. So the Milliken case said, no, you cannot reach outside your district boundary into another district. You cannot cross the district line to integrate.
How?
Okay. So it said you can do all kinds of busing, all kinds of stuff inside your own school district to desegregate, and you should, but you cannot mandate that another district outside the boundary participates.
How did that did that alter anything from the Swan ruling?
Oh yeah, because with Swan, people said, okay, we can use buses to integrate all kinds of schools. And so all kinds of desegregation programs were developed in the early 70s. When the Milliken decision hit 1974, just 3 years later, it didn't stop all integration efforts, all desegregation efforts. It didn't stop it, but it severely curtailed it. Because at that point, if you were going to integrate within your own district, you've already done that, or you could do that. But if you had to go outside your district to integrate, and this was a perfectly reasonable idea for Detroit to reach out to the suburbs, Bloomfield Hills, Dearborn, and so forth, because that's how you integrate. This stopped all that conversation. Just boom, done. It's over. And you can't do anything outside of your own district. So it had a huge effect.
A separate topic, but on the review sheet, would you mind elaborating on what you mean by development of schooling in rural versus urban areas?
Yeah. The biggest difference there, we talked about it briefly early on. In the rural areas, the community hired a teacher, and the community set those rules. Remember the ice cream shop rule and that kind of thing? That's the rural kind of story where you were at the mercy of, you're at the mercy of your local board or your local principal or something when you were teaching. So the community had tremendous say over what was going on in that school. From a curricular standpoint, from a standpoint of what the local norms were in terms of dress, in terms of action and so forth, and in terms of paying. It was a very localized system where the parents had tremendous say, the community had tremendous say over those teachers and what the kids were learning. In the cities, you had, because of the scale of what was going on, with all the three waves of immigration from the countryside into the cities for industrialization, okay, from the south up to the north, post slavery and Reconstruction, and from all the immigrants from overseas coming in, the cities filled up with a lot of kids, and the parents had no say in what that school looked like. Okay, that would be in the city. They brought up Joseph Lancaster. How can we educate hundreds and hundreds of kids with one teacher? Because we got no money. We got very little money. Parents had no say over what was going to go on in those. So in the rurals, the parents had tremendous local control of what their kids were getting educated about, for better or for worse. It was very parochial, very local, very much. The only ideas ever thought about were what was raised in that local community. Okay, and in the cities, it was this notion of how do we routinize education for vast numbers of kids because the scale economy problem. All right, and so the parents then got no say in the cities, and then the city government and the city school system developed all the curriculum and the teaching expertise and so forth to do that. So that's the biggest difference. And you can argue today that that's not much different. There's still some roots, there's some residuals on that. Where we talked about, I told the story of the shirt that gay fine by me that the students wore and got suspended in some school districts. And I said, in Ithaca, you don't even notice that they're wearing a shirt like that. Okay, but 10 miles from here, the kid got suspended. And there's a local community standard that the courts are okay with. So I think there's still this local community standard that's quite pervasive in the rural areas. It has its early roots there. In the cities, it's much more of a professionalized operation that the school is, and much harder for parents to interact with. Hence why there's so much choice, push for choice in the city schools, because the parents don't feel like they have any say over what's going on in those schools. And you have much less that in the rural areas. And partly it's still a economy issue, but partly it's this local control issue. That makes sense?
Also, on the sheet you have a term that says dual system of schooling.
Yeah.
Is it referring to that rural?
Dual system of schooling. Black system, white system. Okay? Although you could argue there's a wealthy system, poor system. You could argue there's an English system, a non-English speaking system. But by and large, what I was referring to there is, through Anderson, okay, there's this entire system of schooling created in the South with the Northern money that was legally supported to be separate and independent from the white system. Okay, and that was right up until Brown. Now today we have a dual system that's not on the such cut and dry lines of race as it once was with the old dual system, but we still have very much a wealthy poor divide, and you could argue that's the current version of the dual system. We read that court case 1849 in Boston. Okay, it was perfectly constitutional for Boston to make black parents take their kids, across town to get to a black school, go past all the white schools, and the court said that's fine. 1849. So we had a dual system up north in addition to the south. Which is one of the last couple of questions are really helpful. Again, the issues of today all have their roots back in our history. So that's why the essays, there's a question we asked, I forget it was last year, 2 years ago. Choose one or two events from the 1700s, separately 1800s, separately 1900s, separately 2000s, that show the importance of social capital. I forget what the question was, but going back and see what you can pull out from different points in time, or about school choice or parent control of their kids' education or something, and tell that story. We've done that.
So so it was like the General Education Board, right, in the South, and
in the Anderson reading. Yep.
Yeah, the Anderson reading.
GEB.
Yeah, but I didn't know that there was also an alternate system of white schooling that was happening because it really just outlined the black schooling. So,
And Johnny Anderson is an African American historian, so he wrote about the black system.
yeah.
And that article, if you haven't read that very thoroughly, again, go back and read it thoroughly. That is it lays out the architecture of an entire system from an individual classroom with Gene's teachers to the oversight of those teachers and the accountability there, up to the countywide system and to the statewide system in the middle of the line. But there was an entirely separate system of white schooling that, not unlike the blacks, was trying to labor costs for everything. Okay, and Anderson does get into the keeping the black kids only modestly educated to make sure that the labor costs stay low and keep competition for the whites for the same jobs was kept intact. And so, no, there's an entirely different system run at the county level. That was the white system. Yeah, we didn't read about it, but that's the opposite side of the coin is the Anderson reading.
I just have a point of clarification. Are magnet schools charter schools?
No, magnet schools are an early form of school choice back in the 60s and 70s when most of them got popular. I consider our local Layman Alternative Community School, LSCS, as a magnet school. It's run by the school district, so the school board would control its schools, and one of them might be a magnet school. But that means that it's a special theme, it's a special purpose that anybody inside that district can apply and go to. Okay. Sometimes magnets have an exam attached to them, like a STIVES in high school or something. Sometimes they don't. It depends on the state whether they're allowed to. But they're meant to just be a special district-run school that does something special. It acts like a magnet so people will be attracted to it. The origins of many magnet schools were trying to create a different way to integrate the schools. Okay, back in the 60s and 70s. Keep white people from leaving the city and attracting black kids into that school and create some integration.
A question about kind of more the formatting, I guess, of the exam. So are we supposed to be bringing in class discussion? Like, are we able to bring in like different activities we've done here, or things from our class discussions?
You can bring in anything you want to bring,
Or
whatever
personal
strengthens your argument.
Okay, so it can kind of be a little more like the annotations part of the critical.
A little bit, and the bulk of it, if we say, please bring in 5 authors and at least 2 of our, functionalism and social capital theory, you got to have those in there. But what else you bring in to share what you know and the linkages?
So we can use it the first person. Do you have like a?
Oh, you can use first person.
Okay.
Sure. I wouldn't use your own experiences as the basis of the bulk of the essay, but to round it out and give perspective on that, that's fine. Thanks. If you're tired, feel free to go. This is so much fun. We could do this all day. But I hope this has been helpful. I can never tell, but it seems like you wouldn't be here if it wasn't this. But any final questions? Anything?
Can we talk about the lemon roll in the Zelman case?
Yeah. So we had 3 different times we talked about under what conditions is it legit? Is it constitutionally supported to take public money and give it to private schools? Okay, and there's the Pierce v. Society of Sisters case, which was that original case back in Oregon, where they tried to pass a law that says every kid in Oregon has to go to a public school. And the nuns, and there's nothing so harsh as with the nuns, they get mad. You watch out. Okay, the nuns got mad and said, no, that can't be right. And they went, and so we had on that one slide there, I think it was 2 criteria by which you can give money to religious schools, but that public schools were not. You couldn't have public only, so private schools were legit. And hence, so that started the story. But the Lemon test was, again, that it is in Rhode Island where they're trying to get the public money to pay for the teachers in religious schools for their math teaching and their English teaching, the secular subjects. And that got into that excessive entanglement issue. So remember the Lemon test had 3 parts? The primary purpose of the money being spent must be secular. So the primary purpose of giving money to private school being secular is that we're trying to educate kids. And the education of kids is a secular purpose. Okay? says that the first one, there can be no excessive government. Excessive government entanglement? What is it? Government entanglement. And that's where we learn with transportation and books, as long as the public school held the money and purchased the service, then the private school kids could benefit from that. But the money wasn't actually handed to the private schools. Okay? So the Lemon test had those 3 parts. Okay, you just go look up the 3 parts there. But that gave some criteria by which you could give money to public schools. Remember, the Lemon ruling was found that was unconstitutional to pay for the salaries. And that was that excessive entanglement. And then we move ahead to the Zellman decision in Cleveland. And Zellman upped it to 5 different criteria. Okay? So the 5, and I'm not going to say, okay, what are the 5 criteria for Zellman? I'm not going to ask you that. But know that the criteria increased over time. And if you could have a sense of in what way have the courts increased the scrutiny or increased the criteria by which you can give public money to private schools, that would be really nice to have. If nothing else, because this is going to happen more and more. Choice is not going away. Okay? Whether it's, under Obama, choice expanded tremendously. And under Trump, it's going to expand even more. So this notion that we're ever going to go away from choice, I think that dog is, or that horse has left the barn.
That ship is sailed.
Yeah, that ship is sailed, thank you. I don't see us going back on that one. So understanding where we can give public money to private schools, to religious schools, is really, really important. So those 5 criteria for Zellman, you may want to, again, I'm not going to have you memorize all 5 of those, but you should have a good sense of what has been the trend in that. So if you're asked about the future and you're right about school choice, one way to limit that would be to craft the criteria around the choice program so that it makes sure it meets those criteria. Or ask the court to review that and maybe go backwards on that. That's a tough sell. So I think that it's a really important question because today this is hugely important. A decade ago, we didn't do a whole lot with school choice in this course. But through the Obama years, charter schools exploded out of an equity choice kind of thing for parents who wanted the most. Okay, and now under Trump, the voucher thing is potentially about to explode. We'll see what happens if Congress can get anything done. But, we'll see. Thank you. Is that it? We got one more. Hey, really good questions today. Nicely done. This is a long time to take out of your day, but hopefully it's time well spent, and it's much less time you have to study later on by coming in here today. I would hope. And I think you got a sense of what we're trying to accomplish with the exam. Okay, give you a chance to respond to some parameters and share with us what you know. Okay, so not to panic about this. This is not 50 questions multiple choice and those dreaded questions where which of these apply and could be A and B and A but not C and those kinds of things. It's not that. Okay. It's meant to simulate a conversation you may have down the road once you get out of here. Okay. And hopefully, in my last pitch, the last time I'll see you, is that when you leave this campus, okay, at the end of the semester, and you talk to people at home about whatever you're talking about, these issues will inform those conversations about public policy related far from public schools, the overall tax policy, okay, land use policy, who gets what's taxable land, all that becomes relevant. And then certainly related to schools as well. But then separately from off campus, on campus, talking to your friends, your dorm mates, your whatever. These conversations, you can tell them that there's stuff to learn. And you've gotten a little bit of a taste of all the different types of research that's been done. A little scratch the surface here, a little bit there, a little bit there. And you can then go take courses that get you much more in depth in any one of those areas. And so if you ever want to talk in the next, couple weeks or a couple of years about what else is available on this campus, by all means, Brian Duff is a great resource on this. By all means, come talk to me anytime you want. Okay, and so I really love these readings from your course. I want to go do more of those kind of readings. Where can I find this? I'll try to help you. Is that it? I wish you luck. It's been fun. And I think you'll enjoy the exam. I know that sounds odd, right? But I think the questions that we're constructing are we think, pretty interesting. We'll see. Have fun. Good luck with all the other courses. And don't be strangers. Stay in touch.